How do we acquire title to property in the United States? Well, generally, property is acquired from another person in the United States, whether personal property or real property. But in a few instances, they're acquired by possession. And these are usually known as fugitive resources, such as wild animals, which can be considered property, abandoned property, property that has been left behind somewhere, and natural resources like water, gas, and usually things in the air, right? These are all things that can be considered property. So for personal property, such as wild animals, usually the first in time. So like I said, you can usually acquire property. You normally acquire property from someone else. But in some circumstances, it's acquired by possession, right? So by actually holding on to it, you own it. Like I said, for wild animals, if you're a hunter and you kill a duck, that is now your property. If there's abandoned property in a public place, for example, and you grab it, as long as it was left abandoned, that is now your property, and you acquire title through possession, right, as opposed to a legal transaction with someone else. Now let's talk about natural resources for a second. Natural resources are also considered fugitive resources. It's another term of art to describe natural resources. And landowners, or those landowners that give rights to others, those other people that get rights from landowners, can capture these natural resources above or below the land. So there's two doctrines you really have to watch out for here in the legal sense, and that's the riparian doctrine, and I got some notes here to make sure I don't miss anything for you guys, the prior appropriation doctrine. So for example, the riparian doctrine is for water, says everybody that has access to the water has equal ownership in the water usage, as long as their usage is reasonable. So for example, if you own a lake house, you're on the front of a lake, and another guy's on the front of a lake, you can't go and dye the lake, right, pink for Cancer Awareness Week, even though it's a great cause, because that person has equal rights to it. So that's the riparian doctrine. That's generally on, in America, it's more on the East Coast than it is on the West Coast, because places that have water issues follow the prior appropriation doctrine. For the most part, which is the first person who had access to that water will now have access to all the water, or can use the water in their manner, the way that they decide to use it. So for example, if you have someone in northern Nevada that has been using water for 100 years, someone in southern Nevada can't come and buy a property on the river and say, please stop using the water. We're now here, because that person, as long as they've been using it for a reasonable manner and consistent way, they're not going to be able to stop the person that had prior use of that. So that's the prior appropriation doctrine. Natural resources can also be known as free-flowing bodies. So for example, if you're talking about oil or water and you drill down in your land, that's a free-flowing water. Now that water or oil may flow onto another property, but you're allowed to take as much as you want from there. Again, most of these laws are codified or in statutes in per state and on the federal level. But for the most part, you have the need. Now, you can't drill sideways, right, and go into the other person's land, because as a landowner, you have the right, you acquire title to what's above and below to a certain extent. So you can't go and that's actual invasion of property, right? If you drill down sideways into another property, but you can drill down, and then that water, even though there's some that's flowing on the other side, you can go and grab as much of that water as you want, or that oil as you want, because it's considered a free-flowing body, which is, again, one of the ways that you can acquire property, right? So that oil can be considered personal property, or that water can be considered personal property, and now you've acquired it. Because, like I said, most of the time you acquire possession of personal property or real property from someone else, but in a few instances you can acquire it by possession. And in real estate, there's another thing called adverse possession that we'll get to, that also describes how you can grab land by possessing it, or a house by possessing it. So that's how you acquire title to property, real and personal. It's usually by purchase from someone else, but in few instances, like the ones I just named, you can acquire title by possession. We'll talk again soon.